When I read through this page for the first time and looked at the new additions to the game, the videos that they have of it, I thought this has got to be a mod. This has got to be a prank someone is playing, like a fake leak like they do with Smash characters all the time. Like, this seems fan made. And then I realized I was on the Nintendo website. These changes are possibly the most significant changes to the mechanics of Splatoon since at least Squid rolling. Like, all of these in combination with each other are going to have a completely unpredictable impact on the game. I say that because I've taken 3/4 of a second to look at Twitter, and I already know that people are jumping to conclusions, as always happens, and claiming things must be the case about the game. They're making assumptions upon assumptions and assuming, oh my god, the game is going to be amazing. Oh my god, the game is going to suck. I've seen both of those takes in significant quantities, again, from barely taking a glance at the page. Let me look you in the eye right now and tell you this. Nobody knows how the game is going to be when this launches. Nobody can predict effectively what the combination of variables they're changing is going to end up changing about the overall feel of the game. Nobody knows what the balance is going to be like in the weapons and the way that the game is played after this is done, because there's just too much changing and it is unclear how impactful any of it is going to be. Some of these changes might not matter at all. Some of these changes might have an enormous impact. Which combination of ones matter and which ones don't, again, we don't know yet. So it's going to be at least like a good week or two before even the top level players are going to have half an idea of what's really going on here. So temper your expectations, but I'm going to go through and talk about what I think might be important, what I think might result from these changes in a vacuum. I'm not going to put out there whether I think all of this altogether is good or bad. What I do think is going on is that Nintendo is experimenting with the core of the game of Splatoon in these later days of Splatoon 3 to see what changes they want to make in future versions. If they want to change things in Splatoon 4 and make a bigger divergence from the way the game is played so far, maybe if there's a mechanic they're testing for Splatoon Raiders, I don't know. I don't know where they are in the dev cycle of that game. Maybe there's something like that there too. But I think that this only makes sense if they're trying to throw something crazy at the wall and see what sticks, so they have a better sense of what they want to do in a future installment without ruining the core gameplay experience. They're throwing this out there for experienced players who have been playing their game for a long time, who have stuck with their game for a long time, and they know that these people are not going to be scared off by a sudden change all of a sudden. New players might be, so they want to test things with us now so that when they give the game to us later, if we hate it, they can take it back. That's my thinking. Let's get into what's actually changing here. Flow Aura. This, first of all, shoutouts to the localizer. Hats off to them. Like, they knew their audience. They knew that someone wanted to be able to say that they're farming aura and to have that actually apply to a game mechanic in Splatoon. Here's how flora. Plants. Here's how plants work. If you feed your plant 3 kills in quick succession, that's what they show in the video, that's why I'm saying 3. So 1, no aura. 2, no aura. 3, aura. You see the sparkles, they are now a shiny Pokemon. If you get a triple, or maybe, some combination in a longer period of time, hard to say, this state is activated, and it is when you activate it that you get a burst of paint on the ground around the player. The aura lasts for about 30 seconds, and during that time, you get run speed, swim speed, ink resistance, and intensify action. So this is like one of those compound gear perks you get from Last Ditch Effort, from Comeback, that you get from Opening Gambit. Those kinds of perks are generally very powerful as long as you can activate them frequently enough. And the trick with those, when you have them on gear, is usually can you actually hit that trigger condition often enough that it's worth it over something that's less conditional. Obviously here, the condition is doing something you're already trying to do already, eliminate enemy players, so it's pretty much never going to be a bad thing to get it, unless there is one potential downside, which is that the sparkles give your position away. It looks from this video as though when they're swimming, there's a little bit more glowing going on than there normally is. It's hard to say without slowing it down, but I think I can see sparkles as they're moving. And that might be a little bit of an extra visual tell that makes you a little bit more obvious. It's nowhere near as bad from what it looks like here as, say, the Tacticooler buff is, where you get that big contrasting color mark, chevron, next to you. But that's one slight potential downside here. When we see them get the picks here, so they've got the aura now, and you can see every time they get a new pick or a new assist, they get this burst of ink that emerges from underneath them. It's not on any sort of like timeline that's happening. It's not a constant effect. It's something that they get from getting a pick. So it's something that makes it so it's kind of, it reminds me of MOBA games where when you get a kill in like League of Legends with Kha'Zix or Katarina, I'm thinking, you get your cooldowns reset. And it almost seems like they're kind of trying to mimic that, where you get that sense of like tearing through the enemy team, and it just gives you your resources back to be able to keep doing it. That almost seems like what they're trying to do. So like if your feet get painted, but you win the trade and you end up being able to move afterwards, like now all of a sudden, oh shoot, we're so back. Like it says, each successive splat will reactivate the ink overflow that you got when it started, painting the ground around your feet again. So there's even more incentive to keep going. Obviously, you run out of opponents at a certain point. So there's only so much that you're going to be able to do with that. But 30 seconds is a long time in this game. Like, the game can end in 30 seconds easily. It's way shorter than that, really. So you extend the duration. It doesn't say how much each successive splat extends the duration. If it just completely resets that 30-second timer, that's kind of crazy. That's something you could keep going for the entire game. But if it works more like Opening Gambit does, then you really have to kind of keep the pressure on and kind of keep going for that to work. It's basically like they gave everybody Opening Gambit, which makes me interested in whether Opening Gambit itself is getting reworked, removed from the game. They're just trying to like put it in there for everybody since nobody else was enjoying the thing that they made for us. Maybe that's the idea. Really hard to say. The impact that this is going to have is hard to determine. We don't know what amounts of gear you get for it. We don't know exactly what the trigger conditions are. We also don't know how much it gets refreshed from another elimination. So any of those things could move it one way or the other. This also, I'm curious whether this stacks with the Tacticooler buff. I'm curious whether getting splatted would reduce the timer that you have with this, or if that 30 seconds just keeps ticking like it does with Opening Gambit. Because then, if that's the way it works with the Opening Gambit idea, what this really heavily incentivizes is running Tacticooler. Tacticooler not only would stack with the extra speed to make you move insanely fast through the map, like Tacticooler is already a crazy movement buff, but this would just be ridiculous. maybe it works on this current gear system where you get diminishing returns as you get more, so it wouldn't be as big of an impact. That would be a smart way to do it, I think. But anyway, what would be huge about Tacticooler is that instead of dying, taking down like 15 seconds of your timer because you have to respawn and jump back in, it could make it take like 3 seconds of your timer. And now you have another 10 seconds still, at the very least, to go back in, figure things out before you have to start worrying about getting a splat again. Like, that would let you stay in the flow state for a lot longer. And that's something that really heavily incentivizes that. Another thing I was thinking, of all of the weapons that are likely to have an insanely good KD ratio, number one on the list in my mind is the Snipe Rider. All you need is to hit 3 different opponents with 3 of your 5 shots that you get from a single charge, and you have an opportunity to get the flow state. Literally every time you charge the weapon, you could get flow state before you have to charge the weapon again. You don't die a lot, so you're likely to get more in a row. And you get a lot of assists, not just from having insanely long range and being able to tag people across the map to combo with your teammates, which is the meta right now, but also because Tacticooler gives you assists. So unless they change the way assists work, where you have to actually deal damage and not just give them Tacticooler, it seems like a pencil could just stay in flow for most of the game. And one thing I want to check really quick is whether I'm looking at their special gauge in the upper right. What I want to see is if the special gauge jumps when they get the burst of ink after they splat someone. So it looks like that ink doesn't actually count towards special charge. Like, you get the burst of ink from them being splatted here, and that putting enemy ink down. When you get splatted, enemy ink goes at your feet where you were. And so that's part of why it's dangerous to group up around your teammates, that you might get your feet inked by them getting splatted. But here, for example, you saw that there wasn't that much of a burst because they were standing on the grate over uninkable turf. So there's not much going to get added to that. So that burst right there isn't actually adding to their special meter, which would be crazy. This is already a big win more mechanic. This is already something I'm a little worried about for snowballing, because snowballing generally I don't think makes the game better. I like that you always have just about the same resources to get out when you respawn that the opponents do to try and keep you in. But that would have just been overboard. That's so much paint, and I'm glad it's not going directly into the Snipe Rider special meter so that they get like 2 coolers in 10 seconds. So that, I have no idea how that's going to play. A lot of people are saying that that's going to really emphasize rushdown play. I think that it's definitely going to emphasize cooler. And so to that extent, yes. I do, however, think that in that case, it's probably a buff to the Snipe Rider specifically, and also to a lesser degree to the Rapid. Those are both weapons that are going to be getting a lot of assists, especially. That are going to be poking at long distances, and that's kind of what their job is to do. So I could see them getting the flow state pretty quickly, and that leading to cooler loops and all of that stuff. So if this works the way I think it will, cooler is way more important, which is insane because it was already like towing the line of like, you need to run this in every comp. So that might put it back there, which a lot of people aren't necessarily going to like, but one thing to say about cooler is that it does make the game faster and more aggressive than it would be otherwise, and that is something that people do tend to like. So it kind of depends. I don't think it like makes the game impossible for anchor players, but I do think that it is going to change the landscape of what weapons are played a lot, assuming those assumptions are true. That's a lot of prevaricating that I'm having to do. That's a lot of like checking myself and making disclaimers. And that's before we get to the second change that there's going to be in the game. To be clear, there are like 4 of these changes that are very dramatic changes to the mechanics of the game of Splatoon that will definitely alter the way that the game is played with any weapon. That was just the first one, and that one already, I'm thinking like, this is dramatically going to reshape the metagame. Health bars. This is crazy. This has never been a part of the video game, and I'm so confused about why they're adding it right now, if not just to trial it for a later game. That this has to be, they're seeing if this would work. Now, we'll show what this looks like. It's possible to see opponents' remaining health when they've been hit. This is, I guess, an answer to the complaint. Well, I shot that guy twice and they didn't die, and I have a 52 gal. What happened? It's fall-off damage. The answer is fall-off damage. But, like, this way people can see, oh, hey, that first shot didn't get them to 50%. I might need to back off instead of greeting for the second shot. That might be something that you're able to do now, if it's clear enough exactly where that line is, if you get good enough at reading that. Previously, you could only see how damaged an enemy was by looking closely at how much ink they were covered in, and not so easy to do in the heat of battle. One good argument I've seen for having the health bar is that this is an accessibility thing. That for some people, they are able to access seeing that detail in the game, and they're rewarded for it, whereas others literally can't. Like, don't have the capacity to see that or the attention span to see that. And so having a health bar to tick down instead might be a better way. Now, what instantly comes to mind for me is, okay, if we're going to try and give actual numbers or like information, wouldn't it be more space efficient on screen and also more specific and accurate in the information to just put up a number? You know, make it like Genshin Impact or Fortnite. You know, you tag someone and you chip their shield, it's a blue number. And you know exactly what the numbers have to add up to. Make the kids learn to count, you know? If I hit them for 52, now I know I can go in for the second hit. If I hit them for 49, now I'm like, do I want to greed for that second shot with my 52 gal? I don't know. That would be enough information, and it would be in a way that's a lot more temporary. It takes up a lot less space on screen. Like, real estate on screen in a game of Splatoon is really valuable because there's a lot that will get in your way. It is already a very overwhelming game. So to add another splash of contrasting color to that, that's a bold choice. So here's what this looks like. So you see a little flash of white as it goes down, and then you see as they start to heal that it goes back up. And this will be really good for labbing the game out and really getting a sense of how fast Inklings heal, because that's something that's really hard to judge normally without seeing into the game's code. So this will be a good like reality check for people about how fast they're healing, how low that opponent actually was. You know, they call, they're one. My guy, I can see they're at full health. Like, that sort of conversation is going to be possible now, and it's going to be interesting for sure. It will at least be a learning experience for us to know more about the game. Now, the remaining health will be shown in a bar above their heads for a few seconds, provided they've not ducked behind cover or dived into their ink. So you can still hide. This isn't just wall hacks as soon as you hit someone. You do get those wall hacks if you open your map, but that's an okay trade-off because you have to open your map to do that, and being able to play the game with your map screen open is not the easiest thing. Also opens you up to getting blindsided by other stuff. So this is not like such a debuff to the person who gets hit. It is still attacker favored in that it gives them a better risk-reward sense. You'll also be able to see health bars of your teammates if they've taken damage. So this is going to be a lot more information that's now available to us. It's something that we can use both to assess whether it's worth for us to take the risk because the opponent is low or not, also whether we're low or not, or we'll also be able to see if a teammate needs to sit in the ink and heal for a minute. There's a lot of possible ways that this works out well. Like, more information isn't necessarily worse. I'm worried about visual clutter, and there's another game design idea that I'm not going to get into on this video, but I might rant about it in a follow-up video after this. So that's health bars. That's the second major thing that's changing about the game. And I've still got more. They've changed the size of your hurt box. For those who don't know the game design stuff, the way that a game detects whether someone gets hit is they draw this really simple shape around a character that's colloquially called a hitbox, or to be more specific, if it's the collision detection on the character, you might call it a hurt box. I shouldn't say collision detection. I should say hit detection. But so this little oval or whatever that shape is called around this inkling, I would call a hurt box. And then there is a circle around, say, a splatter shot bullet flying out there that I would call a hit box. Just to keep the two apart from each other. Functionally, they're the same thing. They are an in-game coded object that as soon as it intersects with one of these other objects, the game realizes, oh, hey, this hit something. Now we need to trigger this player takes damage animation and in-game effects, change their health bar to whatever else it's going to be now, etc. So changing the size of these makes it easier or harder to hit someone when you aim at them. What they've done is they've kept the Inkling hitbox the same, but they have made the Squid form hitbox smaller. This incentivizes players to spend a lot more time swimming, especially in combat. It encourages them to change their position instead of standing still and firing a lot. So this is going to, only incentivize people to get out of walk and shoot syndrome even better. On top of that, though, what they've done is to compensate, they have made the hitboxes of the weapons. Let's see if this is visible. Changes have been made to the hitboxes of players' shots. Shooter range main weapons now have much bigger hitboxes, while longer range main weapons have only had their hitboxes slightly increased. So now it's especially important to go down to the Squid form because if you're standing up, it is effectively going to be even easier to hit you than it was before. So it's easier to hit you if you're standing, harder to hit you if you're in Squid form. Again, incentivizing going into Squid form when you reposition in the middle of combat. So they show a few of the changes here. This is just some examples, so this is not the comprehensive list. But again, they're just going through attacks in swim form, it's going to be harder to hit them. If you attack them in kid form, it's going to be easier to hit them. Now, the changes to the size of the hitboxes of, say, splatter shots, or especially, in my case, 52 gal, those are going to have implications that go beyond just being able to hit players easier or better in these specific situations. Because, for example, if you make the shots on a 52 gal bigger, what's going to happen now is they're going to miss less often due to RNG. Now, a bullet has to deviate even more from where it used to be able to miss. So this is a 52 gal buff in a lot of ways. I'm just thinking about this from my own selfish perspective. Looking at my weapon, now, number one, I already have to go into swim form a lot as it is just to reset the RNG to make it so the shot spread isn't impossible to hit things with. So this is already the way that I want to be playing the game, and that just makes this even better because now I can dodge shots better. Number two, my shots are less likely to deviate and I'm more likely to hit things. So this is buffing me in multiple ways. Number three, to go back to a couple of other changes, Flow Aura is something that's more likely to activate on a weapon that's more likely to get triples, which the 52 is one of the best weapons in the game at doing. On top of that, If I get more information on opponents from their health bars, now I know a better risk reward assessment for taking fights. Like, all of these stack. And maybe this change doesn't matter. But if it doesn't matter, then all of these stack on top of each other differently. The combinations are really hard to anticipate. And so, like I said, we don't know exactly how the game is going to change. We just know that it's going to change drastically. Fourth, major change to the game. Incredibly significant at competitive level. They've finally nerfed stealth jump. I don't know if they have nerfed this gear perk since, like, after Splatoon 1. This might be the first time that has been changed since then. Stealth jump has basically been mandatory at competitive level for a very long time. Because stealth jump is the most reliable way to make super jumping into the game safe. And super jumping into the game saves you so much time and so much tempo that it is always worth doing if you can get away with it. So stealth jump has always been the preferred way. I know I'm going to immediately get questions, wait, what about drop roller? Drop roller does not stop a competitive player who has a splat bomb. They will always get that jump if they have the splat bomb ready to go on your jump. There are a lot of ways you can time other bombs to it. And on top of that, some players can just anticipate where you're going to roll or react to where you're going to roll and shoot you anyway. So oftentimes drop roller is not enough. The only way to keep you safe in those kinds of cases is when you have stealth jump. So now what they've done to stealth jump is that while the stealth is still intact, the flight time of your super jump is increased when you have stealth jump equipped. So here is a demo of that. So this is without stealth jump. They're landing at the same time. With stealth jump, it takes longer to go further distances. So there is actually a travel time. It's not that you just arrive, at the other end of the map at exactly the same time. The flight time is increased depending on the distance, and you get rid of that if you take the stealth jump off. So it's still exactly the same length of time teleport without stealth jump, which can make you get into play faster, just it's making you choose speed over safety if you're going to do that, which is a really interesting strategic question. Now, it's an interesting question. Whether that results in interesting answers remains to be seen. It might be that now stealth jump is just not viable and nobody's going to run it. It might be that stealth jump is still the way that you want to go. It's only in the case where you have to make a decision one way or the other and there are two good answers to that question that this becomes an interesting gameplay mechanic. But that does remain to be seen. That is a really cool way to nerf stealth jump. It is basically the same kind of nerf that you get from Ninja Squid. Because Ninja Squid's whole thing is allowing you to play more aggressively. But what an aggressive player wants to do is after they get their pick, they want to be able to move up and take more space. And their ability to accelerate the game depends on that. So they have to make a difficult call a lot of the time. Is it worth it to give up the movement speed to get a more guaranteed ability to get a pick? In this case, is it worth it to give up a second or two of time to be able to get there more safely? I think that's an interesting idea. We'll see how it actually plays out. But that also is a nerf to the Tacticooler playstyle. So I think this one change is the one thing that I look at as aggressive 52 gal player who wants to play with a Tacticooler, and I think this is the one thing that is not a direct buff to my playstyle. This is the one thing that's not a direct buff to Rushdown. Rushdown, running with a Tacticooler or even double cooler heavily depends on people being able to super jump in after they get splatted. Because that's going to be happening a lot, and they're going to be respawning a lot faster. So having the ability to do that's important. Having stealth jump has been enabling the heck out of that, and now that might no longer be quite as powerful as it was. So major update, even just with those 4 things. Now, there are some other parts to the patch notes. We're going to look at those now. Adjusted the size of the circle indicating the explosion radius for the reef slider to the radius that deals lethal damage instead of to the radius inked. So I think this is just a good quality of life change. I think a lot of people will be misled by seeing what that radius is on screen and thinking, oh, I just have to stay outside of that radius and I'm safe. And I think that this is a good way to have it. Like, what are they most worried about? They're not worried about their feet getting painted as much as they're worried about insta-dying. So I think that's good. Anyway, L3 is getting 1 buff and 1 nerf. They've given it a shot speed buff. So this is very similar to the shot speed buff that the 52 gal got recently, which has made it insane, in my opinion. And the L3 is getting a very similar buff. But it also decreased its ability to paint. So they want the L3 to be a fighting weapon. They want this to be splatting people and moving people more in that direction with it than they want for it to be painting, which is potentially bad for it. In my recollection, the L3 has generally been used as a paint support because it's just less reliable for doing damage to enemy players. So, like, you can absolutely fight with it, and the better your aim is, the more you get out of it, but you could say that about a weapon that's easier to hit shots with, and a lot of the time people have not really seen enough upside, especially with the burst fire mode, where you can't be rapid firing, to be able to put up with all of that. So I don't think this is going to change whether it sees use, but what they're trying to do, and they mention this later on, is they're trying to hone in on a niche for the weapon. They're trying to make the weapon specialize a little more so that they have a more unique identity, which I don't think is a bad way to approach the game. Dynamo increased the ink of spray droplets, so this is just an overall painting buff. Adjusted the damage fall-off rate due to distance to make it possible to deal 100 damage at greater distances. So they're giving it a paint buff and a damage buff. So this is effectively a range buff. It's not going to increase the max range, but it's going to increase the range that you can go for the one-shot. So this is going to be a little bit of a possible check to rush down playstyles, in that Dynamo is really good at eating someone who's trying to run at it, and increases the amount of ink consumed. So this is the part that takes it down a peg after those pretty significant buffs. It gets an ink efficiency nerf, which means it's going to have to finish a fight soon. It's not going to be able to just keep swinging at you until it chips you down. It has to be more decisive now. Blaster reduced the time and movement restricted after firing by 30th of a second, so that's 2 frames. So this is a pretty big buff to the vanilla blasters, which might be a move to try and make them more competitive with the S-Blast, considering that has been running rampant these days. H3 gets a damage buff, 44 to 45. Doesn't change much in terms of its own use, but now it might combo a little bit better with other weapons. So if something does happen to do 55 damage, then this will combo with it now, where it didn't before. Splat Roller reduced the amount of time it takes for ink to begin recovering after a swing. So this is white ink frames on a swing, reduced by 2 frames. So slight buff to Roller on its ink efficiency. So this isn't like frame data in terms of its attacks, so I don't think that's as big of a deal, but that is still a buff. Heavy increased the radius inked, increased the radius point of impact. So general painting buff for Heavy. I think Heavy has definitely needed something to get it back into competitive use. There is the version that has Kraken, which has seen some use in niche cases from what I've seen, but a lot of the time people will just prefer an E-liter to that instead. This just needed something to get it competitive, because it's still going to be probably pretty heavily outclassed in a lot of cases by other options. The pencil and the E-liter just outfight it really hard. It's really hard for it to move its charge into a position where it can go after those weapons, and those weapons one-shot while it has to hit multiple shots, so that's always a disadvantage. And it also gets outranged by them. So it can't really fight the chargers too well, and if you're going to avoid fighting the chargers, you're going to be able to very quickly charge Cooler by painting a ton on the Headit. And you're going to be able to get the Ink Vac, which people are more and more gravitating toward on something like a ballpoint. And you're going to be able to fight people better with a Nautilus. So, like, there are a lot of these niches where even if those weapons I'm mentioning in those niches aren't meta, the Heavy is still getting outcompeted by them in a lot of ways. So I think that this is a good direction to move in. I don't know that it's going to change its place very much, but that's an idea. Tetras increase the speed of shots by 19% without changing. So shot speed buff on the Tetras is a pretty big deal in that they're a little bit on the longer range side, and sometimes you do have to lead your shots a little bit more with them. So this could definitely make these a lot easier to be lethal with. I don't know if this brings them back into meta. They were for a time in Rushdown. It's definitely something that I think people are going to want to experiment with now, especially now that, again, Tacticooler only seems to be more back. Splatbrella reduced the amount of ink consumed when firing a shot. So ink efficiency buff is great. I do think that consistent damage is probably the biggest thing that's holding this weapon back as much as it is, but the thing about ink efficiency on a Brella is that's more uptime for your shield. Like, that lets you do Brella things for much longer. It lets you stall even better. So, because like a lot of the time, the way you beat a Brella is by running it out of ink. So this is still a huge buff in terms of its ability to play its role. And maybe it doesn't need the damage buff because of it. Maybe that just buys it more time, but time will tell. And then S-Blast. They have nerfed the S-Blast. Very deserved. This has been the strongest weapon in the game, arguably, for some time now. They decreased the radius of the short flight distance shots. So these are the jump shots, the ones that are really big radius but really short range. And I think decreasing the radius of that is a reasonable thing to do. I don't, however, think that this is the main thing that's making the weapon strong right now. I think the fact that the weapon has such a long range one shot and that it can still fight at short range to any degree is really what's so powerful about it. So this hurts its short range, but its long range is still really good, and I think we're still going to see it get used. Reef Slider increased the radius of the explosion that deals 220 damage by about 20%. So huge buff to the lethal radius, which might be another part of why they're showing you where that lethal radius is now, which is nice. But they've also decreased the radius inked and decreased the maximum distance of the charge. What they're trying to do here, and they mention this actually directly later on down below, they're addressing slider cheese. They're trying to address the fact that for a long time, this special has been used on zones specifically so that it can just scoot through the enemy team with iframes and solo cap the zone by itself by painting a whole lot, and there being basically nothing you can do if you can't stop it from starting up. They don't want it to get used that way. They want it to get used for violence. And so they are making it so that it's better for the violence, worse for the inking. And I think that that's a good idea for how to balance it. We will see if the execution is effective at that, of course, or if it causes other problems. One other really interesting point here, raised the center point of the explosion to make it harder for opponents to avoid it using a small height difference. So if you're on the ground and it is centered right here, that means it reaches the furthest straight left and straight right. But if you are able to rise up either by climbing a wall or even just jumping from this position right here, now you avoid that radius. So what they're doing is they are setting the point higher up so that now the radius is going to hit more like this. That will be interesting to see the impact of for Reef Slider players. That might lead to some cheesy stuff. That might also just lead to some people getting hit by stuff that they weren't ready for, and having to adjust. So lots of potential implications there. But that's a little bit on the smaller side. I do think that to change the slider cheese is probably the next biggest change after those big four, as if we needed more. But then after that, we also have some points to special changes, which I think are generally, I like a lot of these. New Squiffer is getting a little bit of a buff, which we haven't been seeing tons of Squiffer at any level really, so always good to see those getting a little something to maybe give them an edge. Chargers, the ZNFs specifically, are getting a points to special buff. Maybe give them a little more of an identity, give them something more they can do. Now they can play for that special. Tri-Nouveau getting a points to special buff. We were already seeing a bit of this for double cooler comps, so to see this, we're probably going to see more Tri-Nouveau coming out. I don't know that this one in particular was necessary, especially given how valuable Tacticooler is about to be, if we're correct with my predictions here. Sloshing Machine coming down. The people who played at the beginning of the game, alarm bells are going off in their heads like, okay, we gotta not let this go too far now. We can't make this weapon too good. I'm already starting to see a little bit of a resurgence of Sloshing Machine. And this is a weapon that can easily go crazy if you give it a little bit too much. So that's something to keep an eye on. Splattershot Pro gets Crab a little bit slower, which maybe that was a problem with some other people who were playing, but I have not seen that be an issue. We've got S-Blast 91 getting a points for special nerf. Awesome. That is a change that is needed. This is a weapon that has been running rampant, and hitting it both with the main weapon nerf and with the points to special nerf, that might put it in a much better place these days. So that's going to really change up the core fighting weapons of a team. There are going to be other options besides S-Blast. There are going to be other things you want to consider. It might be something that only specialists are going to these days. We'll have to see how that plays out. And Mini. This is something that we've been seeing a massive resurgence in recently, in part because they can just chuck hammers at you, and they paint for those hammers really fast. And they've been recognizing that, and they've been putting that. So, like, all of these special changes, I understand a rationale for them doing these. I mean, the machine, it can have 210. It can have 210. That's fine. Just don't let it go too crazy, right? These make some sense. And so it's really interesting that they're coming out now when the balance of the game is going to change so radically that, you know, this, which might have made sense in a normal patch, who knows where things are going to be after all of this is said and done. One other change that we've got is that they're changing the weapon displayed under X rankings to show the most frequently used weapon instead of the last used weapon. This, I think, makes a lot of sense. You know, what is the weapon that made you the rank you are? That's what should be showing up. And so I like that that's the way that they're going to do it on the leaderboards here. Not a huge change for most people, but I think that's a reasonable way to do it. So, like I said, I'm not going to try and assess what all of this will mean overall. I can't put together an idea in my mind of what the Splatoon metagame of version 11.0 is going to look like. There are too many variables. There's too much in combination with everything else. But I do have some hypotheses. I do have some predictions about how certain things could work in a vacuum. And I'm going to, you know, as soon as I get my hands on the game, as soon as we get more footage, I'm going to be looking and trying to test those hypotheses and see if that's the direction that I see things moving in. So January 29th, which we knew, 10 a.m., and I'm assuming that's Japan time. So this actually falls, let's see, what time is it in Japan right now? Right now, it is 7 p.m. Eastern time, pretty much on the dot. So this is basically take Eastern time, add 14 hours. They're 14 hours ahead of us. So if we take this 10 a.m. and subtract 14 hours, that gets us to 8 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday, the 28th. So 8 p.m. Eastern, Wednesday the 28th, is when this is dropping. So it looks like that's all that we have to look at about this. First of all, I want to shout out Nintendo for being consistent from the one page to the other, for actually giving us all of these updates that we're interested in seeing. Because a lot of the time in the past, videos from Splatoon JP did not make it to Splatoon NA. And that's clearly not the case here. So I'm glad for that consistency. Unfortunately, it doesn't mean that there's new information to glean from going on here from what I've seen. And maybe there's more that I'm missing. This is already a very long video, so maybe that's something to address in the comments. I'm really glad I didn't go on that tangent about game design. That'll have to be a whole other thing. There is a lot to pick apart here, and I've said it like 3 times now, but again, don't trust anybody if they tell you they know how this patch is going to end up, how this game is going to play as a result of the changes that are being made. Nobody knows. And I think that's really exciting, and I'm really looking forward to being able to figure it all out.